In any business, sometimes the biggest threats come from the inside. And we're not always talking about some mastermind committing fraud. It could just be a simple but very costly mistake. Well, there's a powerful principle designed to prevent both, and it's called segregation of duties. Now, it might sound a little formal, but trust me, understanding it is absolutely fundamental to protecting any organization. So let's break it down.
Okay, let's just start with a quick thought experiment. Imagine one single employee, just one person, has the power to create a new vendor in your system, approve an invoice from that exact same vendor, and then turn around and cut the check. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, that kind of unchecked power is exactly why this whole principle of segregation of duties is so critical.
And that situation, it has a name, and it's every bit as serious as it sounds, a toxic access combination. This is what happens when one person gets conflicting access rights that let them control a whole process from start to finish. It basically creates a massive blind spot, a place where fraud or a huge error can happen and go completely unnoticed. So, if these toxic combinations are the poison, then what's the antidote? Well, that brings us to the core principle we're talking about today, segregation of duties, or SOD for short. It's the framework that's specifically designed to break up these really dangerous concentrations of power. So what is SOD really? Simply put, it's at control. It works by taking a critical task, breaking it into separate parts, and then assigning each of those parts to a different person. The whole idea is that no single individual ever has end-to-end control. This makes it a foundational defense against insider threats. And it doesn't matter if they're malicious acts of fraud or just honest-to-goodness mistakes. And this image here with the interlocking gears, it's the perfect way to picture it. For the whole machine to work right, each gear has to do its own unique job. One gear can't just decide to do the job of another. It's the same idea with SOD. A process can only get finished through collaboration, which creates this natural, built-in system of checks and balances. Here's the perfect analogy for it: the two-person rule for a bank vault. One person has a key, a second person has another key, and you absolutely need both to open the door. That's segregation of duties in a nutshell. It makes it structurally impossible for one person to act all by themselves. Okay, so that's the theory. Let's move on to practice. To really see how this works in the real world, we're going to break down one of the most common and highest risk processes in any company: paying a vendor. What you're looking at here is a map of what's called the purchase-to-pay cycle. This is the whole journey, from the moment you add a new supplier to your system, all the way to the moment cash actually leaves the company's bank account. And because it directly involves money going out the door, it's a prime target for fraud, which makes it a perfect case study for SOD. So this whole cycle breaks down to four really distinct stages. First up, you've got vendor management. That's where the official list of suppliers is kept. Second is procurement, where a purchase is actually requested and approved. Third, accounts payable, where the invoice gets processed. And finally, cash disbursement, which is, when the actual payment is made. SOD demands that different people, or even different teams, handle each of these stages. And we can get even more granular than that. I mean, check out this table. It shows specific controls just for that very first step: vendor management. Look at those key phrases: independently reviewed and staff amending files cannot also approve payments. This is huge. It means the person who can add a new vendor to the system absolutely cannot be the same person who then pays them. That one separation is a critical line of defense. So that's what's supposed to happen. But what happens when these controls break down? Let's dig into a real-world audit that shows exactly what can go wrong. Our case study comes from a 2016 internal audit of Seattle Public Schools. Investigators took a close look at their entire purchase-to-pay cycle, and, well, they discovered some pretty significant gaps in their internal controls. The audit uncovered two classic SOD failures. First, the same people who were ordering goods could also mark them as received. You can see the problem there, right? Someone could order stuff for personal use and then approve the delivery themselves. Second, the accounts payable team, the folks who pay the vendors, could also create new vendors. That is a textbook toxic combination, basically opening the door for payments to be made to totally fictitious companies. So how'd they fix it? Well, the before and after here shows the solutions were really direct and logical. For that first issue, they reconfigured system access to build a strict wall between the purchasing and receiving roles. For the second one, they simply took away the ability for the payment team to create new vendor accounts. Simple as that. In both cases, they just broke the toxic combination.
And the results? They were crystal clear. A follow-up audit confirmed that the actions management took had actually worked. The risks were properly addressed, and the new controls were effective. It's a great example that shows, yeah, SOD failures are serious, but they are often very fixable with a few targeted changes. All right, let's zoom out for a second. We've seen SOD work in one specific process, but where does it fit into the bigger picture of running an entire organization? Because as we're about to see, this is way more than just some accounting rule. It's a strategic imperative. This complex-looking cube represents something called the COSO framework. Just think of it as the gold standard. It's a comprehensive model that top organizations all over the world use to manage all kinds of risk. And right there, at the heart of this big strategic framework, that's where you'll find the principles of SOD. If you look inside the framework, SOD is a perfect example of what they call control activities. These are the real-world policies and procedures that turn a risk management strategy into actual action. By implementing controls like SOD, organizations can protect their operations, make sure their reporting is accurate, and meet all their compliance goals. See? It's not just a back-office task, it's a real strategic tool. And just look at who relies on these controls. You've got security teams using SOD to prevent insider threats. You have compliance and audit teams who depend on it to pass regulatory checks. And then you have IT teams who use its principles to build secure and manageable access systems. It's a concept that really connects an entire organization's defense strategy. So we'll leave you with this question. Now that you understand the power of segregation of duties, take a second and think about your own organization. What's the single most critical process that needs this kind of protection? Whether it's handling cash, managing inventory, or protecting sensitive data, identifying that key risk is always the first step toward building a truly resilient defense.